June 30th, 1908. Just after 7 in the morning, over the remote forests of Siberia, a column of blue-white light splits the sky, brighter than the sun. Then a flash, then a fireball, and then the sky itself seems to explode. Hundreds of kilometers away, the ground shakes, windows shatter, and a man is thrown from his chair by a wall of heat and wind. In a single instant, a forest the size of a large city is flattened to the ground. Around 80 million trees, knocked flat by one blast. The explosion is heard hundreds of kilometers away, and for days afterward, the night skies over Europe glow so brightly that people can read by them. It is the most powerful explosion in recorded history. And yet there is no crater, no impact, nothing. To this day, no one is completely sure what it was. This is the Tunguska event. To feel how strange this is, start with the place. This was one of the emptiest, most remote corners of the entire planet, the deep forests of central Siberia. Endless pine forest, swamps, and rivers stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Almost no one lived here. A few scattered settlers, and nomadic reindeer herders who had crossed this land for centuries. About 65 kilometers from what would become the center of it all, there was a small trading post. On that morning, a man was sitting outside it on his porch. It was an ordinary summer morning, and then, in the north, the man saw the sky split open. A column of light, blinding, brighter than the sun, tore across the heavens. For a moment, the whole sky seemed to catch fire. Witnesses far across the region described the same thing, a flash so bright it lit up the morning like a second sun. Then came the heat. The man on the porch felt it hit him like the door of a furnace flung open. A sudden blast of warmth so strong he thought his shirt was about to catch fire. And then the sound. A series of deafening booms, like a battery of cannons rolling across the forest. And right behind the sound came the shockwave, a wall of moving air. At the trading post, 65 kilometers away, the blast wave threw the man clean off his porch and knocked him unconscious. Windows shattered, the ground heaved, and he was one of the lucky distant ones. Far closer in, the nomadic herders had it far worse. The blast flung people and tents through the air, knocked entire reindeer herds off their feet, and set the forest ahead of them ablaze. They described the ground shaking, a wind that tore the moss from the earth, and a heat that scorched everything. To them, it looked like the sky had fallen, and the world was ending. And then, almost as fast as it came, it was over. The fire, the wind, the noise faded. What it left behind, deep in that forest, would not be seen by the outside world for nearly 20 years. Because in those few seconds, the blast had flattened an almost unimaginable area of forest. Not burned it down, flattened it, like a giant hand pressing the trees to the ground. Around 2,000 square kilometers of trees were knocked down, an area bigger than many major cities. By later estimates, roughly 80 million trees fell in a single moment. To put it in perspective, the explosion is estimated to have been over 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and it happened in a forest, with almost no one around to see it up close. Even though it happened in the middle of nowhere, the planet noticed immediately. The shock from the blast traveled through the ground and was picked up by instruments thousands of kilometers away. The pressure wave in the air was so strong it circled the entire Earth, not once, but twice. Weather stations as far away as Britain recorded the strange ripple passing through the atmosphere. And then came the strangest part. For several nights after the blast, the skies across Europe and Asia glowed, not with stars, with an eerie, silvery light that never fully went dark. In cities like London, the nights were so bright that people could read a newspaper outdoors at midnight with no lamp. Some thought it was a strange sunrise. No one connected it to Siberia. That glow was almost certainly caused by the blast throwing a vast amount of dust and ice high into the upper atmosphere, where it caught the sunlight from over the horizon. The whole sky was lit by the explosion's debris. So here was this bizarre situation. Half the world had seen glowing skies and felt strange tremors, and yet almost no one knew that, in a remote Siberian forest, the largest explosion in modern history had just gone off. The reason is simple. The place was just too remote. There were no roads, no railways, no telegraph nearby. The nearest real towns were hundreds of kilometers of swamp and forest away. The few locals who had survived nearby were terrified. The nomadic herders, in particular, came to see the area as cursed, a place touched by the sky's anger, and many refused to go back. Word of a great fire from the sky did trickle out into local rumor and a few newspaper lines. But Russia at the time had bigger problems, and no one organized a serious expedition to go and look. And then history got in the way. A world war, a revolution, a civil war. For almost 2 decades, the country was in chaos. The mystery in the forest simply waited, untouched. It wasn't until the 1920s that one determined scientist decided to finally go and find out. And he was convinced he already knew exactly what he would find. The scientist was certain it had been a giant meteorite, a huge rock from space that had slammed into the Earth. And if a rock that big had hit the ground, it would have left an enormous crater. He pictured it clearly, a vast impact crater, and somewhere in it, tons of valuable space iron. Finding it would be the discovery of a lifetime. So in 1927, he set out for the heart of the blast. The journey was brutal. The scientist and his team crossed hundreds of kilometers of frozen rivers, swamp, and dense forest, with local guides who were deeply afraid of the cursed place they were heading into. And then they reached the edge of it. After all those years, the scientist became one of the first outsiders to see what the blast had done. And it stopped him cold. Stretching to the horizon was a sea of dead, fallen trees. Millions of them, stripped of branches and bark, all lying flat on the ground. A forest the size of a city, simply knocked over. And there was a pattern to it. The fallen trees all pointed away from one central spot, like spokes on a wheel, or grass flattened by a giant footstep. Everything had been blown outward from a single point. The scientist followed those fallen trees inward, toward the center, toward where his giant crater and his space iron had to be waiting. And when he got there, the real mystery began. At the very center, the trees were not flattened. They were still standing upright, but completely stripped bare, with no branches and no bark, like a forest of burnt telegraph poles. Locals later called it the cemetery. This was a huge clue, though it deepened the mystery. Trees directly under the blast had stayed standing, because the force came straight down on them from above. Only trees further out got knocked sideways. But the thing the scientist had crossed Siberia to find, the giant impact crater, simply was not there. He searched the center again and again. The ground was scarred and swampy, but there was no crater. And there was no meteorite either. No huge space rock, no tons of iron, not even a single large fragment of the object that had caused all this. The thing that flattened the forest had vanished. Think about how strange that is. An explosion over 1,000 times stronger than an atomic bomb. A forest the size of a city flattened. And the cause had left no crater and no body. Nothing solid at all. The scientist returned several times over the following years, mapping the destruction and taking the first photographs of it. Those images stunned the world, but he never found his crater, and he never found his rock. He found some small round pits and hoped they might be impact holes, but digging them up turned up nothing. The closer he looked, the clearer it became. Whatever exploded here never actually hit the ground. And that single insight is the key to the whole thing. The standing trees in the middle, the trees blown flat all around them, and the total absence of a crater. Together they point to one strange answer. Here's what most scientists now believe happened. Far out in space, an object was on a collision course with Earth, most likely a chunk of rock or ice, maybe 50 or 60 meters across. That's not even very big, a single large building, but it was moving at tens of thousands of kilometers per hour. And at that speed, hitting our atmosphere is like hitting a wall. As it tore down into the thicker air, the object slammed into more and more atmosphere, which couldn't get out of the way fast enough. The air in front of it was crushed and heated to thousands of degrees. The pressure on the front of it became absolutely enormous, while the heat tried to tear it apart. And a chunk of rock or ice simply cannot survive that. A few kilometers above the ground, it reached its breaking point, and then it exploded. Not on the ground, in the air several kilometers up. All of its incredible speed and energy was released at once, in a single, colossal airburst. An explosion in the sky. That airburst sent a wave of heat and pressure smashing down onto the forest below. And that explains everything the scientists saw decades later, every single strange detail. Right under the explosion, the force came straight down, so the trees stayed standing but were stripped bare. That's the symmetry of upright poles. That spot is called ground zero, directly below the blast. Further out, the blast wave hit at an angle and flattened the trees outward in every direction, which is exactly the spokes of a wheel pattern of fallen trunks pointing away from the center. And the missing crater? There is no crater because nothing solid ever landed. The object blew apart in midair and mostly vaporized, turned to dust and gas, leaving almost nothing behind to find. That same vaporized dust and ice, thrown high into the sky, is what made the nights over Europe glow. Suddenly, all the strange pieces fit together into one event. Scientists still debate exactly what the object was. A stony asteroid would mostly shatter and vaporize. A piece of a comet, made of ice and dust, would vaporize even more completely, leaving even less behind. Either way, the core idea is the same, and it's now the accepted explanation: a space rock that exploded in the air before it ever touched the Earth, which is why it hit like a bomb but left no scar. Modern computer models of an airburst match the Tunguska forest almost perfectly. The size of the flattened zone, the standing trees in the middle, all of it. The science holds up remarkably well, but the leading explanation is not the same as case closed, because no one ever recovered a clear, undeniable piece of the object, and that empty space is where the wilder ideas rushed in. Over the decades, the lack of any solid remains made Tunguska a magnet for unusual theories. Some came from scientists, others came from much further out. One serious-sounding idea was antimatter, the strange mirror opposite of normal matter, which destroys itself in a burst of energy on contact. A speck of it, the theory went, could explain a blast with no crater. Another suggested a tiny black hole had passed straight through the Earth. But scientists pointed out the obvious problem. A black hole would have punched out the other side of the planet, and it didn't. There's even a theory blaming the inventor Nikola Tesla, claiming he accidentally fired some kind of energy weapon from far away. There's no real evidence for it, but the idea refuses to die. And of course, there's the most famous one of all, that it was a crashing alien spaceship exploding over Siberia. This idea didn't come from a scientist. It came from a science fiction writer in the 1940s. He wrote a story imagining a nuclear-powered ship exploding at Tunguska, and the public loved it so much that many people slowly began treating the fiction as if it were a real possibility. It's a great story, but it runs into the same wall as the others. We now know that a simple space rock exploding in the air explains everything we actually see without needing aliens or antimatter. That said, the search for a physical piece never fully stopped. In 2007, one team of researchers pointed at a small lake near the center, called Lake Checo, and suggested it might be a crater from a surviving fragment. If true, that would finally be the missing piece of the puzzle. But other scientists studied the lake and disagreed, arguing it looks far older than 1908. Like everything here, even that clue stays unresolved. Today, the forest at Tunguska has mostly grown back, but the event still matters enormously, and not just as a historical curiosity. It's quietly one of the most important warnings our planet has ever received, because here is the part that should make you sit up. Tunguska was the largest impact event in recorded history, and the object that caused it was, by cosmic standards, small, just a single large rock, and it was pure luck that it exploded over an empty forest. The Earth turns. If that same rock had arrived just a few hours later, that explosion would have happened over a major populated region instead. A blast over 1,000 times stronger than an atomic bomb, going off above a city, would be a catastrophe almost beyond imagining. Tunguska was a direct hit. That simply happened to land on a forest. That's why, today, space agencies take this seriously. They run programs to scan the skies and track asteroids that come near Earth, specifically to spot a Tunguska-sized rock before it ever arrives. There are even real missions now testing whether we could nudge a dangerous asteroid off course before it reaches us. In a very real sense, the study of planetary defense began in that flattened Siberian forest. Smaller rocks actually hit our atmosphere fairly often, usually exploding harmlessly high above the ocean or empty land. A Tunguska-scale event is rarer, but on a long enough timeline, it is not a question of if, but when. We even got a small reminder in 2013 when a much smaller rock exploded in the air over a Russian city, blowing out windows and injuring over 1,000 people. And that one was tiny next to Tunguska. So, more than 100 years later, what do we actually know? We know the scale, the largest explosion in recorded history. We know the rough cause, something from space, exploding in our sky. And we have an explanation that fits the evidence beautifully. A space rock that burst in the air, kilometers above the ground. For most scientists, that closes the biggest part of the mystery. But the thing itself was never found. No crater anyone agrees on, no chunk of rock in a museum, no final undeniable proof. The object that did all this simply erased itself. And maybe that's what keeps Tunguska so haunting. It wasn't a war, or a monster, or a human hand. It was the universe casually flicking a single rock at our planet, and very nearly hitting a city. A reminder that the sky above us, which looks so empty and calm, is not really empty at all, and that the difference between an empty forest and a vanished city can come down to a few hours of the Earth turning. So what do you think it was? The space rock that science points to, or something we still haven't figured out? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe. Next time it's another true story that sounds impossible, but really happened. Thanks for watching.